Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the story today, we're going to be approaching something very unique, but something that definitely most of us hear about pretty regularly in the news, and that is what it is to live and eventually die because of cancer. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the book Farewell, My Loves, and this is someone who actually experienced this herself, but actually came out on the other side grateful for the fact that she was given a second chance at life after she was diagnosed with breast cancer. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Amber Farman. Amber, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know that was sort of a short introduction, but I kind of usually, when it comes to something like this, like to allow my guests to kind of share their story and how they came to be involved, especially in the story that you wrote here in your book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, my story, Farewell, My Loves, actually came to me 2 years before I even got my diagnosis. So I actually started working on the project randomly. One night, an idea just kind of flashed through my brain, and I thought I had it. I had a story where I thought I could get from A to Z. And so I started working on developing the characters and the story plot, things like that. And basically the plot of the book is just basically a mom is preparing her family for her departure, and she's faced with some choices on the other side. So I worked on that story for 2 years, having no clue that I probably had cancer all along at that time.
Now, these are fictional characters you wrote about?
Yeah, they are fiction. It's a fiction story. Absolutely part of my life has been woven into the story. It is a fiction story. Yeah.
Because I was taking a look at how parallel your story is with the story in here, the 4 children. And I was like, wait a minute, okay, I'm kind of confused here. Is this really about her? Is this just a way that you were able to express your experiences through these characters, but in the end, it turns out well, but not in the way you would like it to?
Absolutely. That's like I said, it's like woven. It's definitely part of my life. Sometimes when you're just starting out as an author, you want to write about things you know. So I definitely thought of it as my last words, or what would I do if I was in that situation. And so it definitely is close to home. There's a lot of it. The love story between the 2 characters is almost exactly how my husband and I fell in love. So there's definitely aspects of my own life woven into that book. Yeah.
So the 2 of you actually did work in Kenya then?
Yeah, we went on a missions trip. I was 18 at the time, so I was young, and he was 22, and we went to Africa. So that is actually truth. Part of that is truth. So very similar to the story of how the main character, Robert, he just heard Meredith's name, one of my characters, and fell in love. And that's very similar to how our story happened, my husband and I.
Mm-hmm. I know Meredith is actually the one who happens to be having sort of the dying wish that she would like to have someone to replace her. And I found, as you read this, with the central character who becomes the hospice nurse, how those 2 came to know each other. It was a very unique approach. I thought, well, nobody really kind of meets each other that way for that particular purpose of replacement. Tell us about that one there. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, as the story progressed, I would say there's 2 versions of the story. I wrote a complete manuscript, but after I was diagnosed, things change, and so I think that was part of it. The story with Carrie and Meredith and how they met, all of that was to help me separate myself, I think, from the story, because I really, for so many, I don't know, a lot of people would tell me maybe change the ending, change how it will be after I was diagnosed with cancer. Maybe they wanted my own life. They just want me to live a long time. So part of the whole Carrie and Meredith was, I think, a way for me to step back and really, these are fictional characters. It was a way for me to start separating myself from Meredith. And that was her own path and her own destiny. It's not my destiny. So yeah, it's funny when you write. I will be honest, when you write, it's like a movie in my head, and so I just kind of sit back and think, okay, where are these people going? I know it sounds crazy, but just kind of how it is. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, having the experience that you had, being diagnosed with breast cancer, that's certainly scary enough, but to actually get to a level where you might have to consider, I'm not going to get through this, so what's the next step, especially when you've got a family with 4 children, a loving husband, there are friends. There certainly, and you express this very eloquently in the book, those kind of emotions and those kind of beliefs that you have, you start challenging those, saying, I always believed that if I was a good person, if I was always doing the right thing, why does this have to happen to me? And why do the people that are out there kind of screwing things up, if you will, why do they get to have long lives? And you start really looking at the bargaining that you start making with yourself and probably even with others and decide, what is the next step? What are the possibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're faced with the unknown, and wow, you're right. What if I don't make it through this? What if when I go get my CAT scan, the cancer is all over my body? I really had to go to those dark places, and I had to really be honest with myself, just as I was with the characters in the book. Just as the characters went on their journey through this process, it was also my journey, and I had to ask a lot of the hard questions, and I had to face my darkest fears. So what would happen if I had to say goodbye to my family? And ultimately, I think any mom would want, we would all, and any parent or any loved one, I think the bottom line is we want our loved ones to be okay. And then you're right, you do start challenging and asking really hard questions. And I really had to dig deep and ask, and if I was truly honest with myself and I asked, where am I going to go? I think a lot of people, a lot of us, me personally, for many, many years, believed 100% I knew exactly what was going to happen after I passed away. And when you're really faced with it, sometimes that shifts and change, and then you might have to acknowledge that maybe I'm not so sure of what's going to happen. So, yeah.
Well, and that's the fascinating thing, especially when you have, let's say, we talk about the characters of Meredith and Robert. They had gained their religious belief being Christian, which was something that pretty much was what their family was before, so this is the belief system that they took on. This is the one that they served. And interestingly enough, as they begin to have children, Robert decides, I've got to really question this faith that we're involved in, because if we continue and we transfer that belief to our own children, what if they start making mistakes, as he begins to question, and they're damned to hell, so to speak, for their sins? What kind of a God is this? He really begins to question these things. And eventually, of course, Meredith starts doing the very same thing, and that's one of the hardest things, one of the hardest hurdles, especially in something, like the belief system they're in, to say, should we be doing this, because that's a sin in and of itself? But you really have to ask that hard question, how well is this serving us, especially us and our family?
Absolutely, absolutely. And just as Robert and Meredith had to ask those hard questions, my husband and I, same very similar thing. It is a very hard thing, because you're absolutely right. In a strong religious organization, or being raised from a tiny child to believe this so wholeheartedly, it is a sin to. It's not good to question. It's not good to doubt. I was raised. That's a really bad thing. You do not doubt. You only listen to. My situation is definitely different than. Everybody is raised differently, but in my situation, it was only the Christian music in my house. It was Christian school and Christian friends, and we were at church 3 times a week. And so to question, is such a scary thing, because your whole foundation of your life, then what does that mean? Was that built on something that wasn't very true? It just shakes you to the core, really. It's a really hard thing to start questioning your faith or your upbringing, what you were raised in.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Amber, the fact that you came through this and you're cancer-free, I'm sure in the back of your mind you're wondering, well, what if it comes back again?
Yeah, it's funny. Today is actually my 6th year cancer diagnosis, cancer-free. Yeah, so I've made it 6 years. I would say the first 5 years I really lived in fear. as much as I'm a go-getter and I love life so much, it was always in the back of my mind thinking, oh, my God, if I can just make it to 40, can I just make it to 40? Like, that was my goal. Like, okay, you know, because I know that it can come back for sure. My body already made cancer cells once. I know my risks are much higher. But I will have to say the past year I finally realized I was wasting so much time and energy worrying about it that I wasn't truly living in the moment. And so I really have a fantastic team of doctors. It took me maybe 4 years to find all of them individually. I have a great support system, great team of doctors that I believe truly care about me. I'm one of these rare patients that I've been in some trials, and sometimes they don't know what to do with me. But I trust them, and I just have chosen to, I just can't think about it. Just like, you know, anything can happen to all of us, you know, really, truly anything can happen to any of us at any time. And so I've just chosen not to think about it. But you're absolutely right. I know that my chances of it coming back, and I'm just proactive, and that's what I can do. I can be proactive with my health, and that's about all that I can do.
There was a time many years ago that I actually did an interview with an author of a book where there were 4 women, each with different stages of cancer, and they each came from different religious backgrounds, and how they came to terms with calling the cancer the process of initiation. In other words, it began to wake them up to life about all the little miracles and the things that they were actually taking for granted. And I'm sure that you probably went through this, and as you came out through the other side, kind of wiping your brow and say, okay, I'm not going to be living and taking life for granted anymore, you know, kind of putting life into a situation where, you know, I'm just going to kind of go every day about my business, you know, just in routine, but to actually awaken. And I wonder, with 4 children, what has it been like to be able to communicate what's inside of you after something like this?
It's been actually a wonderful way to teach my children the value of life and to really say what's on your heart. You know, we talk about it all the time, our communication. You're absolutely right. When you're diagnosed with cancer or you go through something really tragic and you lose a loved one unexpectedly, it can, if you let it, it can really wake you up to life and be on almost sensory overload, which is a wonderful thing too, because you're absolutely right. Every little thing I don't take for granted. And even with my children, how I raise them, we talk about it all the time. We're not promised tomorrow. And I talk about the sky is the limit and what are your dreams and what do you want to accomplish out of life, because you only have one shot. And so that is definitely our motto in our house, and really being open with them where we don't know what tomorrow holds. And so if you're healthy today and you're able to run and you're able to have hands that work, then let's give back to society. Let's always try to do something positive with that. Mm-hmm. So it's been a really great tool for my kids, really good, you know, learning lessons.
You know, and it's certainly fascinating that when something like this does happen, when a person goes through an experience like this, you begin to wonder, you know, is this happening for a reason? And I think that's one of those bargaining questions at times that a person asks when a tough thing happens. You know, as opposed to somebody where things seem to be all working out and going well, and you know, and you say, well, you know, it's happening for a reason, but that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And what was that like for you?
Well, for a long time, you know, because when I first was diagnosed, I was still partly in the church, and so that was something I would hear all the time. Well, this must be happening for a reason. God chose you for this, or you know, this is going to change your life for the better, things like that. And really, I don't know if I wasn't sure if I really wanted to hear that.
Yeah, I could see you with a box of water balloons, like, get out of here, would you?
Yeah, like, you know, I remember the night before I went for one of my ultrasounds, and in my gut, I really did believe I had cancer. I just felt it before I was diagnosed. I just felt like something was really off. And I remember in the middle of the night just really kind of losing it, like preparing for the words, you have cancer. And I remember thinking, why not me? Why not me? Because, you know, bad things happen to good people all the time, vice versa. I think sometimes things just happen. And so coming through the cancer thing now, I'm not quite sure I believe that everything happens for a reason. I think there's cause and effect, there's things that if you make this choice, then that, this will equal something else. I don't know. I'm in the middle on that because I think, is there really a reason that maybe a young child gets leukemia and dies at the age of 8? Is there really a reason for that? Mm-hmm. Is that really for a purpose, a grander purpose? And I just think, no, that's not for a grander purpose. I just can't believe that. But I do think that things happen. There's illness in our world. There's death in our world. There's joy in our world. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's cause and effect. But I don't know if there was some grand reason that why me ended up with cancer, and
you think about that too, Amber, is that when you hear that from people, well, this must have happened for a reason. God has a plan. And I know that myself, I've actually been in conversations with people who take that approach as though you come into this world and all of a sudden it's kind of pre-scripted in some ways, that you're destined to basically live it out the way, quote, God has intended you to, as though you really don't have a choice in the matter about how it's all going to turn out. You feel like you have choices, but according to that line of thinking, you really don't. But, I think that that's not true. I think that you really plan, as you were saying, cause and effect. However, that being said, we live in a very chaotic universe. Things do happen. The idea is, what do you do as they do happen?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When they do happen, I think that's when you have to dig deep, and we have choices to make. Some people can just curl up in a ball and, oh my gosh, I'm not going to live anymore, or I don't want to deal with this. Or you can dig deep. I think that's when our human spirit can really kick in, and our survival and our acceptance and joy for life can really kick in. And I think that's it. Each person has a choice for the chaos or the things that happen in their life, and they have a choice of what path to take. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to get over this with the love and support of people I know, or I just think life sucks, and I can't do anything else about it, and I'm just going to sit here. So I really do believe we all have choices in our gut and our hearts that we could make to make our life better, even in really difficult situations.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the characters that you write here, Carrie. She's quite an interesting character. She's the hospice nurse that's taking care of Meredith, but she also knows that it's her responsibility as well to take care of Robert. But she isn't your typical hospice nurse in how she came to be in service of this couple. This was someone whose own mother had died of cancer within 5 months, if I can remember that part of the story correctly. And so she sort of was on her own little self-destructive path. A lot of partying, a lot of sex with men, just meaningless relationships through college, really trying to figure out what it is she wants to do in life. And she gets to a point where she really would like to have somebody, but in the meantime, it's sort of that quickie sex as she talks about. So she starts going online for the online dating, for that particular purpose. One of the things she does is she checks off the box bisexual. And you think, well, that's kind of interesting. How's this going to turn out? Well, how it turns out is quite interesting, and that's how she comes to meet Meredith. Tell us how you came up with that ideal there.
To be honest with you,
because you got some really interesting stuff in there.
I know I do. So, really, to be honest here, it was part of me breaking off myself a bit from the story, from the original story. And, a good story needs some of this stuff in there, some like, whoa and wow. And part of me breaking off from organized religion personally has opened my eyes to so many things. Once you can come kind of out of the box, you can see people for who they are. So bisexuals or gay or whatever, to love each person just for who they are. And I really wanted to bring that into my characters. Because Carrie is just a struggling woman who is trying to figure out life, just as we all are figuring out life. And Carrie ended up being my favorite character. And so her and Meredith definitely did meet on a very, not the typical thing. But I think as Meredith is desperate trying to take care of her family, I think these two were perfect a match for each other. So it just kind of came to me thinking, partly, how do I separate myself? And how can I really show people just to fall in love with characters and accept people for who they really are,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Well, it really does, because when you write, for instance, the way that you did about this story, you kind of think, well, wait a minute, okay, these are people with a Christian background, but there's some interesting, colorful language and scenarios that are being painted into this story that kind of would really rock the boat for anybody reading this book from that perspective. And I thought that was really unique, because sometimes you can get so caught up in a particular belief system that you don't allow yourself to move beyond that to realize life is a lot more flexible and a lot less linear than sometimes a belief system will lead you to believe. And sometimes that can be your own poison if you can't find yourself having that flexibility or that leeway to see things as they are, as you're saying.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that really parallels my own life. When I began to wake up, in a sense, spiritually, I just felt like, wow, I was thinking so small for so long, and there's so many possibilities. And just like you said, just to be flexible, and there's so many different ways people can live a really great, wonderful life. And that comes in many different ways.
It's such a fascinating read. I think people will really get a lot of enjoyment out of the fact that you actually put everything into a very real perspective, obviously, because this has been a very real experience for you. When you get out there and you answer questions about the book, what is one of the most common ones you find yourself facing as far as a question?
As far as the book, I think the most common question I get is this about you? The whole thing.
Well, if they read your bio, you get really confused if you've actually read the book, because I was doing that to myself, like, wait a minute.
That's probably the biggest one, and it's true, and I think for a while, it took me a long time to get to the point where I was ready to let this book go out in the world. Because, coming from my family, I will be honest, too, my family, we had a book launch party. I had no family attending at that event. Not one family member was present. So I think the biggest question I always get is this book based on you? And as I say, a lot of it is woven in. My complete heart has been poured into this book. And all the emotions, of course, going through breast cancer, for a while I thought, oh my goodness, I've written my destiny. And for a few of the years after I started writing this book, I couldn't even write or work on this project because I was so scared that Meredith, my character that I've created and I put so much time and energy in, I believed, oh my goodness, I guess that's my destiny too. Maybe this is why I started writing it. So for a long time, I was so scared to even write. Mm-hmm. So it took me many years to get through this project and to be ready to face the world with the bisexuality, the character with Carrie and Meredith, and just the twists and turns that I saw coming with these characters. I had to be ready to face my family almost, mm-hmm. And face the people that used to know me so long ago in that tight Christian faith unit. Mm-hmm. So it was. It hasn't been easy. It really hasn't. But at the same time, it's been very liberating and freeing. And I feel like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. Because this is how I believe now. I just believe that I want to love on everybody, and I think everybody can have a great life no matter what their background is.
Very much agreed, and I think we talk about one of the biggest fears perhaps a lot of people have, especially when they realize, well, the way I've been doing things really doesn't satisfy me or work for me anymore. The way that I believe doesn't serve me anymore. And those cornerstones a lot of times come from families, so those are very strong values that are, and I can't think of a better word at this moment, but are imposed on the children. They grow up and they decide, well, this just isn't working for me anymore. There's something more and I want to break free from this. That's one of the hardest things that I think a person can do is to be able to challenge the family, for instance, and say, I'm going to go and do my own thing. I don't think I'm going to answer calls for a while just because I don't want to hear it. And you don't know how often you tend to hear that from people where they think to themselves, if I could just get past the stigma that I feel my family has for me, that things will get a lot better, but I'm going to just keep walking this path anyway. And that's a very heroic path to walk if you can do it.
Yeah, if you can do it. And it's not an easy, it's definitely not an easy path. I think about, too, maybe people coming out to let their parents know they're homosexual or whatever it is. I look at it kind of similar, definitely a little bit different, but it is not an easy thing to do, and it's very scary, and it's also hurtful for your family members. And so the person maybe stepping away from organized religion also has to be sensitive. I've had to learn to be sensitive with my conversations around family members. I'm not there to put anybody down, but I choose my words carefully because I know it's hurtful for them. And, if you look on their side, if they're still really strong believers in a certain thing, then I'm their loved one that might be burning in hell for eternity. And so it's a really sad thing on both ends, and it just needs to be really sensitive. But, the person, I have to tell you, just personally, I've never been happier, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And to now be raising my kids in such a different way, I just see so much joy in their lives. I don't see I used to struggle with being a perfectionist, and I was terrified every day, thinking I need to forgive all of my sins every single day. I really struggled with a lot of things, and now I'm looking at my kids and the different ways we've raised them, and there's so much joy and happiness in them, and they're doing so much good for the world and have such an empathy for the world that I never realized I could be so happy, stepping out of that box.
And there's an interesting conundrum as well. You're raising children. You know how mom and dad can be. Well, you're not doing that right. And you're stepping out of a whole belief system, and now you're going to share your new perspective with your children to show them, that choices are very empowering, and to be able to have the courage as well as the confidence to make choices, whether they come out the way you wanted them to or not. And that must have been a real challenge for you as well, to just deal with the family and how you've decided you're going to raise your children.
Oh, absolutely is. I'm telling you. There's cancer, but then there's been this, and it's really kind of nice to talk about this side of it, my religious or my spiritual awakening, because absolutely, and I know my family, my kids, if they would like to go to church with Grandma, absolutely, please go. I have my freshman right now. He's 14 years old, and he's got friends right now that are Christian. He's got friends, really good friends that are Mormon. So he's been reading the Bible and the Mormon Bible right now. I love that. I love that. I want my children to find their own happiness, and they need to make their own choices. But, with our family, with my mother-in-law, or my own mom, it's very much, anytime they talk to my children, it's always about God. And, they need to really remind my children, which is fine. I don't know. I just have to trust that my kids are going to find their way. And that's just how I parent now. I just feel like there's so many different roads, so many different options, to each their own. But we're not invited as much to family functions. There's been change. There's definitely been change. But I just smile, and I'm just, sensitive, and it is hurtful. I will say a lot of it is hurtful. I feel sad that people can turn their backs because of religion, and that's happening all over. And so it can be lonely. I think at our beginning and our first part of this journey was a very lonely time for us.
Well, and you can also step back and take a look at the religious aspect, and that is when you go to that church every Sunday, is that a lot of times that church has to find ways to be self-sustaining. So what do? You find ways to keep the members coming. You keep the members coming to contribute, and you keep the members to come and volunteer. That's the only way it can be sustainable. If they start walking away, for instance, what's going to happen next? So a lot of the churches, or a fair amount of them anyway, what do? They start creating a fear. Well, if you step away from us, God's going to punish you for that, And you realize that after a while that these people get so ingrained in what they are involved in that after a while you got to wonder if they're beginning to question themselves. Is this really right? You got to wonder if something in them moved a little bit to say, this just doesn't work for me. How am I expected, for instance, I know there was a church a friend of mine used to attend where they demanded to be part of it, you had to give up 10% of your salary.
Oh, wow.
And I was pretty amazed by that, and I said, you continue to participate. I mean, you look at this church, and you can say, well, yeah, they're getting 10% of salaries here, all right, but the fact is that as maybe your parents, when they're into this system, and then you, for instance, have an awakening, and you decide, I'm walking away from this. I think I'm going to take a look at life and a horizon differently, so to speak. They begin to be unsettled about that. It makes them nervous because I think what it does is it maybe subtly gets them to question, am I doing the right thing? So they clench and they hold on to that belief even harder, do you see? And so then they start hitting you and saying, no, what you're doing, boy, and you can almost see the fear like, but what if they do discover something better and I'm over here?
That's a really good point. Yeah. Right. Oh, that's a really interesting take. I think that's, wow. Yeah, absolutely.
And here, when you get cancer, you literally, and this is one way to look at it, you got a get out of jail free card. It's just a way of looking at it, But then the others, again, they stand there scratching their head, well, what do we do? This is what we've bought into. This is what our parents told us to do. And man, I'm going to hold on to this because, I don't want to say that maybe I was wrong. Maybe,
Mm-hmm. Oh, I can absolutely see that. That's a really good point. And it is hard to say, and it is, I think ultimately the hardest thing ever is to question all of it, because you're right. My parents, my husband's parents, most people I know, they believe in whatever religion or what environment they were raised in, that is what they believe in today. So it's a hard thing, and I think people on both ends probably start questioning. That's a really good point. Never really thought about it that way.
Well, you do after a while when you do plenty of these shows where you're talking with people who have actually faced death, and some of them have actually seen the death happen, and then some of them walk through and they come out the other side. And, again, as you were saying, and you can see this within the characters as well, is there's a sense of liberation even in disaster, and you realize that's an interesting transformation to be able to begin to see things that way, whereas most people may not.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's the beauty of life. And I know, I don't know if you think this too, I wish if more people could start waking up and really looking at life a little bit different, like how many more people will be so much more happier too. Just like my characters, I think they had a time of just being liberated and looking at things outside the box and bringing them even more happiness than they can ever imagine.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amber, first I want to let you know what a pleasure it was to have you here on the program today to share your story, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about your nonprofit, Families for Humanity. What's that?
I would love to talk about that. Families for Humanity, my husband and I came up with this idea of bringing families to different countries and experiencing the culture. But while you're experiencing the culture and family, on our family vacation, we're also doing service projects. Since my husband and I, we actually fell in love in Kenya on a mission trip. We started Families for Humanity. We really wanted our kids to get involved. And a lot of times churches, you'll hear missionaries going from churches, but we wanted to do something that wasn't attached to a church. So anybody can join, all backgrounds could come, and then kids ages usually around 7 and up, we encourage. This past summer, we did our debut trip. We went to Guatemala, and we fell in love with the projects, with the people we met, and really started building relationships that we've decided we're going to just focus now on Guatemala. And so I was back in February with the team, and we'll be back in July, and we're really excited. We're working right now on education. And I believe really wholeheartedly education can really empower change in a person's life. So we've taken on a school project there, and we are going to be working on funding teachers and doing scholarships for some young adults that really, college there maybe is $120 a month. And that really can make a difference from making $600 a month to $200, than the $200 a month. Poverty is just so great there.
Mm-hmm. Now, Amber, is there a website people can find out more about you and, of course, this nonprofit?
Absolutely. They can go to my website at amberfarman.com, Farman. There's a link on there that says Giving Back. They can click on that, and I just updated that for Families for Humanity. I have all the upcoming team trips and all the exciting things that are happening. So, yeah, they can just go check that out.
Well, very good. Again, the book is Farewell, My Loves. And Amber Farman, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can find out more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. And also follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio, hashtag Beyond50Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.